But just one thing, because I do think there's something that is sending shockwaves through the Biden-West ring right now this morning, and it is not this impeachment inquiry. It is David Ignatius, a Biden friend, and at the Washington Post, who came out and wrote a piece saying Joe Biden and Kamala Harris should not run again. And his reason for saying it, and I know how the table feels about this, is Joe Biden's crowning achievement, his most significant, was defeating Donald Trump. And we are not sure that he can beat Donald Trump in 2024.
Listen, the only way any of this will make sense is prove it. Prove your stuff. You know, if there is impropriety, this is what we ask them to do with Bonehead.
One thing, and this will be my last one. A lot of people in Washington right now, and I know this is probably going to drive your team crazy that I ask it this way, but I think it matters because it's accurate, because the columnist who wrote a piece today asking for the president not to seek re-election, David Ignatius, is well respected within the building behind you. What's your response to that idea? It's not just about the president, it's also about the vice president who you worked for in the 2020 campaign.
Yeah, well, I'm governed by the Hatch Act, and I want to be really careful, but obviously the president has announced he's running for re-election, and the president is going to make his case to the American people, and I'll refer you to the campaign for any sort of campaign questions. But this president has a lot to be proud of and a lot to run on. He's delivered some of the most consequential achievements and economic progress in generations with the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, which is opening new factories and creating new manufacturing jobs around the country. That's what he's going to be talking about versus these sort of political sideshows that congressional Republicans are starting to launch into right now.
Any expectation he'll weigh in on this specifically anytime soon?
Well, you know, the president can speak for himself. I will say I think he's going to stay focused on what the American people want him to focus on, which is helping to improve them, their lives, their families, not these sort of political attacks on him and his family.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about a very interesting dichotomy going on here in the mainstream liberal media in regards to Joe Biden and whether or not he should be running for office in 2024. Okay, on one side of the coin, you have the mainstream liberal media essentially calling for Joe Biden to step down. Okay, and the reason why they want him to step down is because it has become clear, according to the polls, that if the election was held today, despite the political witch hunts against Trump, despite the 4 indictments, he probably would win. Okay, and it being this early, with Trump having such strong poll numbers and gaining momentum going into 2024, these people are panicking, okay? They're in absolute panic mode, and this is why they're coming out here and essentially calling for Joe Biden to step down. This is why they're criticizing Joe for being too old. This is why they're actually trying to levy some real criticism towards Joe Biden in regards to his lies and his mental capabilities, because they know that the writing's on the wall. However, on the other side of the coin, you have the Republicans trying to impeach Joe Biden for essentially selling out the American people overseas with his son, Hunter, in exchange for making foreign policy decisions. They want to pretend and act like that's not a thing, right? That's not legit, okay? There is no evidence. Okay, the Republicans are making it up. It's a conspiracy theory. They're caving in to the far right, to MAGA, to Trump. They are ignoring that and they're pushing back. Okay, now you would think that maybe they would be embracing the impeachment and say, hey, maybe it's not a terrible idea to have Joe Biden impeached. Maybe, just maybe, that might force him to drop out. Okay, but I think the way they see it is that the impeachment could continue to hurt Biden. And if he refuses to drop out, then it's just going to make it more likely that Trump will win, because the whole point of impeachment is not to actually get Biden up out of office. The actual point really is to create an equivalency between Trump's indictments and the Biden crime family, okay? Because this is all about 2024 and swaying people's opinions going into the election. That's what all of this is about. So, again, the mainstream liberal media understands that, and they realize the writing on the wall here in regards to how likely it is that Trump can beat Biden, which is a nightmare scenario for the Democrats. And so you have mainstream liberal media outlets like the Washington Post and one of their writers, who apparently is highly respected in the mainstream liberal media, not only just calling for Joe Biden to drop out, but he's also calling for Kamala to drop out as well, too, because probably the only politician in the country with worse approval numbers than Biden is Kamala, okay? And again, this is a part of an ongoing effort from the far left media to pressure Biden into dropping out of the 2024 race. Take a look.
Again, the heart of it is whether Joe Biden is the best person to carry this legacy forward. He may decide that he's the only person who can defeat Donald Trump. I mean, he sees that as his mission. It's why he ran in the first place back in 2019. He may decide he's the guy who can do it and nobody else can, and that's his decision. But I felt it was time to have a more public discussion about this. It is, as I say, something I'd be surprised if you and Joe and the people you talk with are not discussing it in private. I find everywhere I go, it's a subject. And what journalists like me should do is take issues like that people are talking about in private and bring them forward so we can have a better discussion. So that's a simple explanation. I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is Joe Biden the person who can stop Donald Trump or somebody like Trump who gets the Republican nomination? That's what he's got to. He's got to look in the mirror, search his soul, and make that decision. And I wanted to raise that question. I'd like him to think that through carefully because I have my concerns.
Well, and Willie, just to answer David's question, Mika and I, everybody we talk to, every political discussion, it talks a lot about Trump. But when it comes to Joe Biden, people say, man, he's too old to run, isn't he? I mean, he's not really going to run. When I say every discussion, I don't mean 99% of the discussions. Every discussion. We got it. I asked Reverend Al if he was hearing it all the time on our show this past week. He's hearing it as well. So, we often will complain about Republicans who will say one thing about Donald Trump off the air and another on air. Well, let me just say, Democrats off the air will say Joe Biden's too old. Why is he running? On the air, they won't say that. So I commend David for at least raising the question. I mean, my question, of course, Willie, is who can do a better job as president as Joe Biden, and who can beat Donald Trump? I don't see a lot of Democrats out there. I don't see any Democrats out there right now that could do that.
Yeah, so you heard that. Behind closed doors, Democrats and mainstream liberal media, they're all saying that Biden's too old, right? That they don't think that Biden can beat Trump, okay? That they're afraid that Trump is going to beat Biden. And again, it's so bad that this guy specifically is calling not just for Biden to drop out, but also for Kamala to drop out as well, too, because I guess presumably she doesn't have a much better chance than Biden. Now, I personally feel that Kamala probably does have a better chance than Biden. Now, it's not by a large margin. I guess my thesis is that because Kamala is not under investigation, right? Okay. And Kamala has much less baggage than Joe. She's not as obviously mentally challenged as Joe, even though right, it's clear that she is also mentally challenged like Joe, either that or high all the time, probably both. But I'm just saying, I think Kamala, even though she is hated in the Democrat Party among the base, I think that she will have a better chance than Biden at beating Trump, just simply given the fact that she isn't president, so she can't really take all the blame for the disasters of the Biden administration. Also, on top of that, she doesn't have the same baggage that Joe has, and she probably has a slightly better chance than Joe. Also, I think that if Kamala was to run, they would run Kamala with somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who's gay, and they would just run a full-blown woke ticket, right? And if you don't agree with it, then you're a bigot, okay? You're a racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. They're going to throw all that out there, right? They don't even need to talk about policy. All you got to say is that if you don't agree with us, you're a bigot, okay? And any attacks against them is bigotry. I think that's a Democrat strategy, right? I really do think that that's the move from Democrats if Joe does step down. But in the meantime, the White House is panicking about more pressing matters, which again is Biden's impeachment, as they're in such a panic mode in the White House that they are asking the media, or demanding the media really, to ramp up scrutiny of Biden impeachment. So basically, they are demanding that the mainstream liberal media play propagandists for the Biden administration, right? Okay, this is what they're saying, okay, while also at the same time saying there's no evidence, all of this is untrue. Well, if that's the case, if it's based on lies, then why the panic? But clearly they're panicking here, okay? Let's read this. Immediately following news of House Republicans' plans to initiate an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden, the White House issued a memo to editorial leaders of media organizations across the United States, calling on the media to cover the process with increased scrutiny because it is based on lies. Again, isn't that amazing that we live in a country where we have the government telling the so-called free press, or what is supposed to be the free press, how to cover a story, right? Again, it's absolutely amazing, okay? It's so funny, okay, how openly fascist this administration is, but then they turn around and point the finger at the other side of the political aisle when, again, they're just so openly fascist, right? Correspondence from Ian Sams, the special assistant to the president and senior advisor and spokesman for the White House counsel's office, said that in the shifting media climate, quote, process stories that fail to unpack the illegitimacy of the claims on which White House Republicans are basing all their actions only serve to generate confusion, put false promises in people's feeds, and obscure the truth. AKA, again, this is what they do. This is what they mean by disinformation. Anything we disagree with is disinformation and untrue, right? Again, if it's so untrue, then why don't you just let the process play out? Okay, if the Republicans don't have evidence, if this is all a witch hunt, it will play out. But they don't want it to play out because I believe personally that there's a bombshell at the end of this. I think they know it. I just think that they need more powers in order to actually get the indisputable evidence that they need. He said, quote, it's time for the media to ramp up its scrutiny of House Republicans for opening an impeachment inquiry based on lies. So with that being said, what does the mainstream liberal media do, right, in response to what Biden is saying? Well, they do exactly what they're supposed to do, which is to be their propagandists, which is exactly what's going to happen here in this heated debate interview between Matt Gaetz and Abby Phillip of CNN.
I mean, he makes an important point that in addition to what he said there are not the votes to support an impeachment inquiry into President Biden, and yet you continue to push Speaker McCarthy on that. Why is he wrong when I think the numbers are frankly on his side?
See, here's the problem, right? Here's the problem that I have with all of this, right? People keep criticizing the impeachment inquiry as if they don't understand that the impeachment inquiry is not an impeachment, okay? The impeachment inquiry is just an investigation. It gives Congress more power to investigate, to get documents that can lead to the quote-unquote bombshell evidence that the mainstream liberal media claims they need in order to actually admit that Biden committed crimes against this country. Which, you know, even if they got the evidence, they probably still deny, okay? But regardless, it's just an investigation. These people are pretending like this is actually impeachment, and it's not. And I don't see anything wrong with investigating if you have a ton of circumstantial evidence, which they have. There's a ton of circumstantial evidence against Joe Biden. Yeah, you should definitely look deeper and look further. Right? I mean, look, here's the thing. If the roles were reversed, if Trump was in the White House, do you think that the media would be asking the same questions? Claiming that there's no evidence, right? No, they wouldn't be doing it. They'd be saying, oh, no, you need to investigate because clearly there's circumstantial evidence, just like they did with the Ukraine phone call. That's exactly what they did. Exactly what they did.
Well, let's take the votes. I think that it is an illusion of Washington that you can't put anything on the floor that's not going to pass. I actually think that our representative republic would be more vibrant if we had more votes that were not always just predetermined, right? And so if we put an impeachment inquiry on the floor and it didn't pass, well, then the people who didn't vote for it would have to be responsive to their voters. That's the way this whole thing works. And while Ken Buck and I have strong disagreement on the quality of the evidence against Joe Biden, it's interesting to note he is one of my strongest allies on the spending matter. So we can disagree on impeachment, we can agree on spending. It shows that the issues aren't particularly linked. As to the quality of the evidence, though, I just have to say, I mean, we do have bank records, devices, laptops, travel records, changes in administration policy. Seems like pretty strong evidence to me.
None of which links President Biden to...
Well, it was Joe Biden on the phone.
None of which...
He was calling into the meetings. Wait, Abby, are you actually trying to tell your viewers that you don't believe that Joe Biden was involved in Hunter Biden's business deals?
It's not
a
about
hard case.
It's not about what I believe. It's about whether there is evidence that President Biden is linked to the misdeeds that might be linked to Hunter Biden. That's the issue.
No, see, what it's really about for her is what the White House is telling her. What are her Democrat Party handlers telling her that she's supposed to say? Okay, that's what it's really about. Because to say that there's no evidence, but we know for a fact that Joe Biden was a part of Hunter Biden's business meetings. We know that Hunter Biden was being flown out on Air Force 2 to China with Joe to do business meetings. We know that Joe Biden essentially threatened to withhold taxpayer money from Ukraine in exchange for firing a prosecutor who was investigating Hunter Biden's company that he was on the board of, even though Hunter Biden has no actual real skills or talent. Again, there's a ton of circumstantial evidence. So to keep saying that there's no evidence is just a lie, right? It's one thing to say there's no evidence, and there's another one to say, well, there's circumstantial evidence. However, we don't have the direct evidence to show that Joe Biden actually received funds. That is the accurate way, right? That is the actual accurate way to describe the situation. But to come up here and say there's no evidence, it's just, I mean, this is a lie. This is a flat lie. There's a ton of evidence. Again, it's just, they don't want to acknowledge the evidence there. But again, if this was Trump, they don't need any of that, right? This would not be the same conversation. They would be saying, oh, there's evidence, there's evidence. Just like when it came to the Russia collusion hoax, right? There's a ton of circumstantial evidence to suggest that there may have been some collusion, but there was no direct evidence. But again, they didn't use that level of nuance, right? When it came to that, okay? They didn't care. They was like, oh, well, there's evidence, right? There's evidence. They didn't come out here and say there's no evidence. They said, oh, no, there's evidence. And they peddled it as if this was fact, that this was a legitimate thing that we should be looking into, just to find out that, hey, there was really nothing there. Again, the double standard here is amazing. It really is. They don't need any real evidence for Trump, right? Circumstantial evidence is enough to investigate. But with Biden, though, you need more than just circumstantial evidence. If you have circumstantial evidence, then, you know, that's like having no evidence, right? Again, it's amazing.
But I want to get back.
I do want to. I mean, come on. Wait, hold on. Can you just acknowledge that when he calls into the business deals, that he's involved? When he calls into the dinners, you don't think that's involvement?
First of all, this is not about innuendo. It's not about what I believe. It's a question. Do you have evidence? If you had evidence that Joe Biden was linked to Hunter Biden's business deals in a way that is illegal, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would probably have the votes for an impeachment inquiry, but you don't.
Well, see, the problem is the reason why they don't have the votes for an actual impeachment. Now, we don't know if they have the votes for an impeachment inquiry because they're not having any votes for an impeachment inquiry. Kevin McCarthy is bypassing that. So we really don't know. But the reason why they don't have the votes for an impeachment is because you have moderate Republicans concerned about whether or not there's direct evidence. But again, the point of the impeachment inquiry is to obtain the direct evidence. Now, if they don't obtain the direct evidence, then yeah, the impeachment is probably not going to go forward, right? You're probably not going to get enough votes. But when/if they do get that direct evidence, then yeah, I would imagine that they're going to have enough votes to actually impeach the president. But again, this idea that you can't investigate when there's a ton of circumstantial evidence screaming at you, telling you that, hey, crimes were committed here, it's ridiculous. They would never apply this same standard to Trump. That's the whole point. They would never do that because there was a ton of circumstantial evidence when it came to Trump and Russia, and the media said, investigate, right? You need to keep investigating. They never questioned the government spending millions of dollars to further investigate something that had no direct evidence. Again, it's amazing.
Because of people like Ken Buck and people like Don Bacon and many others in your conference.
Well, I see the evidence differently. I think that that's why we need to have the votes and have the debates and have the hearings. And again, they represent their constituents just like I represent mine. Even in my remarks on the floor today, I disclaim and acknowledge all that you're saying. But when we just bundle it up and act as if this Biden family corruption isn't happening and we're not going to do anything about it, well, then Americans of all stripes start to lose faith in the oversight capabilities of the Congress and really in the impeachment power that gives us the requisite checks and balances that are necessary.
Well, look, I mean, there are a lot of members who worry, and Republicans who worry that by starting an impeachment inquiry to try to find evidence that you probably should have before you start the inquiry, you cheapen the process. Chris Christie said something very similar this week.
Oh, well, Chris Christie, gosh, I stopped taking advice from him when he was recommending Christopher Wray for jobs.
But on the substance
on the substance, look, you want to talk about how long we've had the evidence? The FBI had Hunter Biden's laptop since 2019. So this inquiry isn't just going to be into the Bidens and the bad things they've done. It's also going to be in the cover-up, and we do have that evidence. I was deposing Tim Tebow today. Today, I was asking questions about the role of the Foreign Interference Task Force to go and designate any derogatory information about the Bidens as foreign disinformation when that was part of the cover-up.
Let me just move on here because I'm going to reiterate to the audience because we need to be clear. There is not evidence linking President Biden to anything illegal having to do with Hunter Biden. However,
because the Biden administration told her, that's why, right? That's why. This is why she's doing that, because the Biden administration told her, even though there is evidence, okay? 100% there's evidence.
I want to ask you about what Congresswoman
but
Nancy
it's business
Mace...
dealings. That's a key... Wait, hold on. You did a key caveat there.
No. It's about... There's no evidence linking President Biden to anything illegal that you are alleging that Hunter Biden did.
Well, getting the Ukrainian prosecutors fired, I think, was pretty wrong.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace says that you and other, MAGA members of the Congress are bullying moderates. She considers herself to be a moderate. In effect, by putting a lot of seats, Republican-held seats, in jeopardy next year. Are you concerned about that as you plot this strategy of having countless votes on things that you have just acknowledged in this interview you don't have the votes for?
Yeah, I think we should have countless votes even if we lose. And I don't think that's legislative bullying. I think that's legislating. I actually think that that's what can sand off some of the rough edges of the policy and procedural choices that we have to make to run the country. So if there are members of Congress who think that taking tough votes is bullying, I guess they shouldn't have run for the position. Here, yeah, there are going to be some people who are going to be in a tough spot, but their constituents deserve to know where they are. And frankly, I just think that comes with being a member of the United States Congress.
Facts. I agree with that. They should have to take tough votes. Look, here's the thing. Again, the Republicans who represent their districts, if they're afraid to take tough votes, then why are you doing the job, right? If your whole argument is that, well, we don't want to take tough votes because we might lose support, then again, what are you in politics for? Right? You should be out here voting on these things and showing this is why I stand on these issues, right? But hey, like I said, what you saw there from the mainstream liberal media is them doing exactly what the Biden administration told them to do, which is to come out here and to scream, there's no evidence, there's no evidence, there's no evidence, even though, again, the standard would be applied so much differently than Trump. They actually did apply the standard differently than Trump in regards to investigations that they consider to be legitimate and not legitimate. It's just funny how that works. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.